Welcome to the Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, a specter is haunting me. The specter of this movie. This is Cosmopolis. Welcome to the Blast Zone.
Welcome to the Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Cosmopolis, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how's your week going?
I've been feeling like Jennifer Aniston lately.
Elaborate, please.
Is it because I see myself as a beautiful and beloved celebrity star? No, not for that reason. It's because I, like her, am a sufferer of chronic eyelid problems.
I did not know that about Jennifer Aniston, but I did know that about you.
Okay, yeah. She is a spokesperson for dry eye syndrome, which she was plagued with for many years before she had it diagnosed and made it better. What I have is a little different, but it also results in itchy, swollen, generally uncomfortable eyelids and eyeballs. And this week, my issue flared up and I have this big thing under my left eyelid. It's all gross and stupid and dumb, and I do not like it. So, I bought $100 worth of eye drops and ointments and supplements. And as you can see, but the listeners cannot, I am wearing safety goggles right now to try to protect and baby my eyeball in hopes that it gets better.
I was a little taken aback when you first logged on. It was not your usual. Usually you have very stylish glasses on. And
thank you.
You also had a new haircut. You just looked like a different man. And I was like, oh, trying some shit out. I get it. And then as we dug into the reasons behind it, now there's a medical purpose.
I don't know what vibes these safety glasses have. Is kind of Kurt Rambis thing going on? Or
not the full face mask. Was that Rip Hamilton you had?
Yeah, not the Rip Hamilton.
You've got a Horace Grant, Kurt Rambis vibe going on.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, yeah. They are kind of Horace Grant in shape and heft. I like that.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add to that. My eyes are generally okay.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
The rest of me, not so much. I'm just a tad bit hungover. That's making me a bit grumpy, which is bad news for this movie. Even in the best of times, it's not exactly what I am raring to talk about.
Yeah, we're not going to be that kind to this movie under the best conditions. We'll see how we come at it today.
I do have thoughts about this movie and things to say, even some praise to go around, but much more scorn to go around. But Before we do that, you know what time it is. We didn't talk about this off air. I'm sure you know what I'm going to bring for show and tell this week because I've been DMing you about it nonstop. But I want to hear what you brought for show and tell this week first.
I went a different direction than the movie we're doing this week. I'm bringing kind of an action movie in contrast to the inaction movie Cosmopolis. I watched an old Denzel spy thriller called Safe House from 2012.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good Denzel movie in that it contains Denzel. It co-stars Ryan Reynolds, who's fine in it. He's maybe emoting a little bit too heavily. He's laying it on kind of thick. The plot is a stripped-down genre story. It's got a rookie CIA agent versus the dangerous veteran who betrayed the agency, and then it's about the rookie learning dark secrets about how the world really works. It's nothing great or all that fancy, but it's totally watchable. And as a bonus, they filmed it on location in Cape Town, South Africa. So it's kind of interesting to look at. There's a lot of authentic texture and atmosphere to the place. It was a mild hit with audiences, and it's a mild recommend from me.
Did spawn a sequel, didn't it?
Oh, did it? I didn't see that.
I don't know. A lot of those Denzel movies from that era blend together for me, like Two Guns with Mark Wahlberg. I might be confusing it for that. And then I also often get it confused with The Hitman's Bodyguard because that has a similar story and vibe. And who was the other guy in The Hitman's Bodyguard? It was Ryan Reynolds. That's why. No wonder I get confused.
It was straight up the same formula.
Yeah, kind of a ripoff. He's an agent in The Hitman's Bodyguard who must protect an imprisoned hitman on his way to testify at International Criminal Court.
Classic.
That old rigmarole. And and I remember not really loving The Hitman's Bodyguard, but I never checked out Safe House. And I'm a sucker for bottom shelf Denzel, as we learned in the Virtuosity episode.
That's the thing. If you're into that, this delivers all the straight ahead Denzel genre, spy thriller action stuff you could want. It's pretty watchable. Definitely a great time filler to turn on when you want something comfortable and fun.
I also watched a spy thriller action packed film this week.
Oh, cool.
It's called Long Legs.
Uh-oh.
That was a bit of a misdirect. Longlegs is none of those things. It is not action-packed or a spy. It's vaguely a thriller. Man, what a movie Longlegs is. I have been talking about it both on this podcast and off of it for the better part of a year, it feels like, and how excited I was to see it. And I'm aware that it's a bit of a divisive movie with audiences, and a lot of reviews are coming out that like it wasn't as scary as the commercials made me think it was going to be. But if you're an old horror head, you kind of learn to ignore all that marketing bullshit about like audiences were fainting and like the scariest movie, because every 3 years or so there's a new movie that is just trying to play that game. And sometimes it's like Hereditary played that game too, people fainting in the audience. But then like you watch Hereditary, you're like, okay, I get it. Or Paranormal Activity was another one where like pretty much all the trailers for that movie were just audience reaction shots, I feel like, trying to lure people in with that. And Longlegs, it is not extreme horror like Aster style horror.
Okay.
It's not particularly gory at all. There's not a lot of jump scares. It's very much a procedural to some degree. And I don't want to spoil it because I really think it's worth checking out.
Yeah.
A relatively clean slate. It seems like it's going to be a Silence of the Lambs type young FBI agent tracking a serial killer, and maybe she's uniquely suited to catching him.
Sure.
The crimes are strange. They don't necessarily make a lot of forensic sense. There's a question of if there's something more at play here. And then the movie does turn on its head at some point, and it becomes a totally different type of thing, but in a way that feels organic and rewarding. I can't say that I was ever frightened in the movie theater, but it is a movie that I can't stop thinking about, and I'm very excited to watch again someday soon. Micah Monroe is getting a ton of praise for her performance, and rightfully so. She might be the new Scream Queen. She's been crushing it all the way back to It Follows, which was almost a decade ago.
Wow, was it that long? I definitely liked her in that. That was good.
2016 feels right to me. I don't know. But yeah, she's sticking in the horror genre, and Nicolas Cage is getting a lot of attention too.
Sure.
And I did listen to the Big Picture podcast. They did an interview with Osgood Perkins, who directed the movie. And I think after you watch it, that would be a great interview to listen to, because another thing I'm seeing is like, after hiding his face in all the marketing, was he scary enough to justify that level of cloak and dagger? And I think the explanation for why they had him play it that way and why they marketed it that way makes a ton of sense. But again, spelling it out would spoil it a little bit.
I almost didn't question it. Like, I noticed that. I'm like, oh, it's a Nicolas Cage movie, and it's got these killer trailers and great marketing. I'm like, oh, Nicolas Cage is not in any of that, at least that I could see. And I'm like, oh, there's probably a reason, but I didn't bump on it or stew on it too long, because I'm like, oh, it probably makes the movie more fun. That's good enough excuse for me.
I will say, you do see him in the first scene of the movie, so you don't have to wait long if you've been holding out. But I really wanted to give some credit to an actor that I always forget about for whatever reason when I'm going through the actors I really enjoy watching. Blair Underwood is maybe the third lead of this movie. Also, Alicia Witt is in it, which is a great Justified crossover, because we don't have one in this week's movie, so I'm going to count that. That's the Justified crossover of the week. Alicia Witt, who played one of the Crow clan.
Justified crossover of the week.
Cool.
But yeah, Blair Underwood is he's very impressive in this movie as kind of a by-the-books FBI guy who maybe starts to unravel a little bit based on what he's seeing. And that's almost a storyline that plays out in the background of the movie.
That sounds cool.
But it's interesting to follow. I want to rewatch it and really follow his character and to see if I'm truly picking up what they were putting down. And just to head off another criticism of the movie, where they're like, some things are telegraphed like super far in advance and it's really obvious. And I think that's the point. Very much like Hereditary, and not to bring that up again, because there are more than 2 good horror movies in the world. But Hereditary very much has a sense of a terrible destiny you can't outrun no matter what you do. And I think Longlegs is really tugging that string to a degree as well.
Cool.
Really liked it. I can't imagine it'll be in theaters for too much longer. It's already had a decent run, a goodly sum for Neon. So sadly, we will never be able to cover it on the podcast for a Blasttober. But once it's on streaming, all you scaredy cats afraid to go to the theater and see it, check it out for sure.
That's me. I'm looking forward to that. And it says a lot about this movie that you hyped this movie as much as anything that comes around. And the fact that it didn't wilt under the pressure of those expectations says quite a good thing about it.
Right. It was definitely a different movie than I went in anticipating, but maybe a better one, maybe a more enduring one than if it was just a movie that was looking to jump scare you and hit you with gore and like all the creepy imagery nonstop. That would be effective, but maybe not something I'm keen to revisit so often.
It's really fun when movies stick with you and you stew on them afterwards. That sounds like I'm starting to give some credit to Cosmopolis, which I'm still chewing on and trying to make sense of, but not in such a positive way.
Yeah, I think we're both on the same page about Cosmopolis, which is that it flew under our radars for sure, right? You really didn't know much about this movie until we started researching it for the pod.
I don't think I heard of it.
I don't think I did either, which is crazy when you consider that Cronenberg was coming off probably his most mainstream stretch, where he had A History of Violence, which is certainly has flashes of extreme violence that Cronenberg is known for, but it's much more of a slow burn thriller,
right,
with no real body horror to speak of, and is one of not just my favorite Cronenberg movies, but my favorite movies. And then Eastern Promises, which is a mafia drama, essentially, again with Viggo. And these were two of his best reviewed films, and they had much more mainstream appeal than we're used to with him. And then he does A Dangerous Method, again with a Viggo movie with Keira Knightley that was very well received by critics, maybe a little less warmly by audiences, just because Cronenberg movies can be hard to sell, to be fair. But Keira Knightley starred in that one with Viggo, like movie stars in these roles, and like these kind of moves towards mainstream. And then you figure his profile would be at the highest it had been since like The Fly. And this movie just dropped out on the floor like a pile of bird shit or something. Like it was just like, it seemed like they were embarrassed of it when it came out. The distributors really didn't give it its day in the sun in theaters. They saw the reaction to it at festivals and were like, nah, maybe not, and gave it a very limited release. And then it just disappeared. It's lost to time.
It does seem like Cronenberg used his cachet to do a passion project, something that he thought was really cool and niche, and that's what he made. In thinking about this movie, I don't think it's even fair to call this movie a bomb, because you watch it, you're like, oh, this wasn't made for audiences to watch. This was made for a small group of self-identifying intellectual types to reflect upon. This movie is for considering, but it's not for getting in a theater and watching with a group of people.
Correct. It's very much a I don't want to insult people who like this movie.
That's nice of you.
But this movie's head seems to be firmly inside of its own asshole. And I think to some extent, everyone involved knows it. And maybe it's partially the point, but it doesn't make it fun to watch.
It's not that fun to watch. It's difficult to talk about for that reason, because you fall into this trap of like, oh, it's dumb and they're just rambling philosophical musings and it's ridiculous, doesn't seem to go anywhere. And then the intellectual people will go, yeah, you don't get it. That's the point. And actually it's making a double secret smarter point than you can even understand. I was like, okay, maybe it is, but I'm just a person that's trying to watch a movie, and it's got to give me something to enjoy or to think about or to do something with.
To even hold on to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I was panicking. I texted you a couple times that like, I need to rewatch this a third time because I can't just have my thesis about this movie be it's boring and I hate it.
Yeah.
But guess what? It's boring and I fucking hate it. So if I tried really hard to come up with something more to say and I couldn't, I don't think that's my fault.
No, you made a good faith effort to make some sense of it, to take something out of it. And that happened with The Empty Man, which especially for me on first watch, I felt was like, this movie is just babbling and it's being obtuse on purpose. And then something clicked and I put in a little extra effort. I'm like, oh, okay, it's working. I get what it's doing now. I got a point out of it. I got some extra meaning out of it. And then I appreciated it. And I understood why audiences would still find it hard to penetrate. But this movie, I made an effort. There's some things I like about it. I like some of the actors. I like some of their performances, but it's a very small thing. Other than that, like I didn't get a lot out of it.
Side note, The Empty Man would be a great double feature with long legs. And to your point, I used the metaphor of it's like watching Barry Bonds play T-ball, having Robert Pattinson and Paul Giamatti and Juliette Binoche and David Cronenberg put their significant talents to use making this movie. And like their talents are on display to some extent. Certainly Cronenberg's is.
Yeah.
Because he directed a movie exactly the way he wanted to. And I think he got the performances out of the actors that he wanted to also. It's just he was unconcerned if that was appealing to anybody but himself.
And that's a question we'll have to ask as we go through the individual actors and their performances. It does make you ask, why are they doing this way? Is Cronenberg telling them to? Are they all on the same page? It's very hard to come up with anything definitive one way or another, but it's interesting to talk about.
Yeah, it's not a movie that's rife with think pieces and deep dives on the internet. It's like I said, it's not a cult classic. It's just a failure. Financially, certainly, and artistically, in my opinion. But do you want to hear about how the movie came to be?
Yeah, I'm fascinated to hear how this thing happened.
All right. In 2012, Robert Pattinson was still very much Edward Cullen to the public at large. He'd gotten his start in the Harry Potter entry The Goblet of Fire, playing smoldering young bad boy Cedric Diggory. Without spoiling too much, let's just say it was a one-and-done performance. While he had done other roles besides Cullen, including one of the co-leads along Reese Witherspoon in Water for Elephants and Salvador Dali in Little Ashes, he was by far best known for playing the perpetual high school vampire.
This is the role of a killer, Bella.
While Pattinson was a heartthrob to the younger generation, David Cronenberg was
not.
The body horror auteur, well known for movies that would make you squirm in your seat, was coming off a trio of movies with Viggo Mortensen: A History of Violence, Eastern Promises, and A Dangerous Method. All were well liked by critics, and A History of Violence and A Dangerous Method might have even made some money. Cronenberg was flirting with mainstream success to a degree he hadn't since The Fly.
Talk about good buzz.
He took on adapting Don DeLillo's novel Cosmopolis, about a billionaire traveling in stop-and-go traffic on his way to get a haircut, who encounters a diverse cast of characters amidst protest focused on wealth disparity. Cronenberg would write the screenplay, kinda, saying that after he was finished converting the book into screenplay format, all he had to do was separate dialogue from narration. This would be Cronenberg's first credit as a writer since 1999's existence, also a bomb. The director had eyed Colin Farrell for the lead role of billionaire Eric Packer, who was in just about every shot in the movie, and Marion Cotillard to play his new wife Elise, who will definitely have sex with him if he just keeps begging. A budget of just over $20 million was provided, and the movie was gaining steam. At this point, Farrell was forced to drop out due to scheduling conflicts with his Total Recall remake, and Cotillard also had to bow out due to pregnancy. Cronenberg slotted Pattinson into the Packer role.
That's a funny sentence.
And Keira Knightley and Noomi Rapace were considered for the role of Elise before Sarah Gadon was cast. Filmed in Toronto during the summer of 2011, the film debuted at Cannes in May of 2012 to polarizing reviews. Some critics labeled it a masterpiece, some a disaster, and most fell somewhere in the middle. To quote Roger Ebert, Cosmopolis is a flawlessly directed film about enigmatic people who speak in morose epigrams about vague universal principles they show no sign of understanding. Its characters are bloodless, their speech monotone. If there are people like this, I hope David Cronenberg's film is as close as I ever get to them. You couldn't pay me to see it again.
Said the man who was paid to see movies.
US and Canadian distributors got cold feet due to the lukewarm response, already having doubts about the movie's commercial viability, and decided to greatly reduce the size of its release. It would go on to make just $7 million at the worldwide box office, and hasn't exactly entered the hallowed halls of cult classic status since.
What else do we say? Roger Ebert just kind of said it all.
He really summed up my thoughts about this. Like, I hate to just read the most famous film reviewer of all time's quote about a movie and be like, yeah, that, what he said.
Yeah.
But he nailed it in a way that I could only hope to. Interesting to think about Colin Farrell in this movie, though.
You told me that, and I actually think I might like Colin Farrell in this. He has a thing in roles where he's trying to push you away and keep you at a distance from his character that's appealing. And Pattinson's doing his version of that, but I don't know. I feel like the Colin Farrell version of that might actually be interesting.
I think it's a mixed bag if you swap this out for Farrell, because Farrell's about 10 years older than Pattinson, 8 years older than his character in the movie. But Farrell's been famous for a lot longer than Pattinson has. He got his start pretty young, and he's had some staying power, and also has been tabloid fodder for a long time when he was kind of in his wild boy phase. So I think he feels a lot older than Pattinson. And I think a lot of the lines in this movie, a lot of the dialogue is so smelling your own fart style shit that you could only really imagine a 28-year-old billionaire saying them. And like, it might come off as more unbelievable if somebody who's got a worldliness about him is trying to say them.
I take your point. I think that aspect of the movie was maybe lost on me a little bit more. I think that's what's intended, that this is a relatively young guy who's gone too far too fast. His ideas and his view of the world is all stupid in a way, but he's very confident about it. And so that should come across in the Eric Packer character. A lot of that, I think, missed me, and that's why I was just like, I wouldn't have minded seeing Colin Farrell's face in close-up for 90 minutes, but I definitely get where Robert Pattinson's youth works to better illustrate what's supposed to be there.
Yeah, and Farrell had dirt on him at this point in his career to a degree that Pattinson maybe didn't yet. He was still, we know Pattinson now is like a lovable weirdo who's like very interested in like gonzo filmmaking and is for sure trying to make movies that he would want to watch, which was not the public's understanding of him when this movie came out.
Yeah.
And this maybe did help his career in a way where he got, not that it was a success, but at least he did say that it gave him the confidence to take chances and that he was,
oh, that's cool.
He deserved to be in like good movies and not just franchise pictures.
Yeah. So we can thank the movie for that, for helping him pivot and redefine himself in Hollywood and not get stuck doing mainstream pablum.
Which is funny to say because he's fucking Batman. You know, like.
Speaking of rich young billionaires with bad attitudes, I love his version of the Batman.
Yeah, just a morose goth kid. Like
that's what I thought was so great about him in that role, is this guy fucking hates life. And I'd love to see that in my Batman.
It's the only version of Batman that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
As far as like where Bruce Wayne and Batman seem like they're the same person.
Yeah.
I also love the story that Matt Reeves is like, all right, we're going to get you a personal trainer, probably the best steroids money can buy because it is Hollywood after all. And we're going to get you super jacked. And Robert Pattinson was like, okay. And he showed up on set. He's like, I didn't do any of that. He was just a skinny little Robert Pattinson guy.
Well, he learned that from this movie. If you pay attention to the dialogue, there's a few lines that comment on the character's body fat percentage and sculpted physique and all the stuff he does. And like, none of that's there. He takes his shirt off and you're like, that's not our boy, our Pat.
Yeah, it's funny to see him claiming to be in peak physical condition when he's standing next to Kevin Durand, who is legitimately just like a huge jacked guy. Shouts to Kevin. I did love seeing Kevin Durand get this much screen time in like a major motion picture because I'm a big fan of his. He does okay with the role. There's not much to it, just giving status updates.
Yeah, it's a big character role. We'll talk about it when we get to this parts of the story, but you look forward to when he pops his face into the window of the limo because he's more interesting than a lot else of what's going on the screen.
Yeah, there's a few examples of that. Maybe we should start talking about the story so we can get into specifics about that type of stuff.
Yeah, let's jump in the limo and drive. Here we go. Eric Packer, played by Robert Pattinson, is a 28-year-old billionaire currency trader. One morning, he decides he wants a haircut from his favorite barber, so he gets in his tricked-out white stretch limo for the ride across Manhattan. His head of security, Torval, played by Kevin Durand, tells him the president is in town and traffic will be jammed, but Eric wants to go anyway. As his car crawls through the crowded streets, Eric encounters the woman he recently married, Elise Schifrin, played by Sarah Gadon, and over breakfast, they talk about why they don't have sex. Eric proceeds to get visits from a series of his associates who drop into his limo to talk about business, age, sex, or to actually have sex. Also, a doctor comes aboard and gives Eric a prostate exam. Later, he meets up with his wife again, and she can smell the sex on him. Their lunch is then interrupted when anti-capitalist protesters enter their diner and fling rats, which are the symbols of their movement. Over the course of the day's conversation so far, we've learned that not only is Eric's marriage in trouble, so is his billion-dollar business. He's made a huge risky bet on the Chinese yuan, which may lose him hundreds of millions of dollars. And to top it off, Torval informs Eric there's now a credible threat on his life.
Billionaires just kind of live with credible threats against their life, right? Like,
yeah, that's one of the philosophical or cultural topics that this movie debates, right? Oh, it's a threat, but I don't know. Every fact that someone asserts in this movie, somebody else argues about it in like an obtuse, not in like a funny Woody Allen way where they poke holes at everything, but in a less fun way. You know what I mean?
In like the way a stranger at a bar who's a contrarian would annoy you if he overheard your conversation. Nobody fucking asked.
And I guess that's part of the joke or the gag or the premise of the movie is that you have to entertain Eric Packer's weird talking style because he's the boss. And so it's a movie, it's a bunch of conversations of just different people popping into the limo and trying to answer some questions and being rung through this philosophical conversation machine.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, what is all that for? What's the movie trying to say? That capitalism bad? You know, like, but then the people opposed to Packer also suck. Like, they're also terrible, long-winded, obnoxious people.
Yeah, and I would say that both of us are coming into this certainly no experts on Don DeLillo. We're sort of aware of who he is. He's got a vaunted position in contemporary literary fiction. And Cronenberg, like you mentioned in the mono, he just took dictation. He just put the dialogue in there as is.
It feels like book dialogue that has just been transposed to the screen. You referenced the famous, one of my favorite quotes from Harrison Ford when he was making Star Wars. You want to?
Yeah, what does he say? He says, you can write this shit, but you can't say it.
Specifically to George Lucas, who's famously just a bad dialogue writer. But DeLillo, I feel like filmmakers revere him too much where they almost don't see the flaws in adapting his books so faithfully. White Noise is another recent DeLillo adaptation that was really slammed for stiff dialogue, these very writerly affectations.
It's definitely hard to pull off. And that one is Noah Baumbach, who credits DeLillo as very much a major influence. And that's Baumbach doing DeLillo's thing with DeLillo's content. I think Baumbach took great lessons, and he's an example of how to take that heightened dialogue, that dialogue where the characters are all in their own heads, where they're talking past each other, and do stuff that's still super relatable, funny, charming, meaningful. I thought that peaked in the Meyerowitz stories, which I really enjoyed. And the characters in that movie are absolutely talking past each other the whole time. They're each on their own shit, but it's funny, it's charming, and it has heart. And this movie has that talking past each other's stuff, and it's not fun. It's just stiff stiff and stilted and cold and off-putting.
Off-putting is a good way to describe it. I am not a DeLillo advocate. I have never read a Don DeLillo novel to the degree where I, in confidence, told you that I, for many years, confused him with Clive Cussler.
Yeah.
Who is very much not Don DeLillo. You described him as like an airport novel guy. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like he wrote Sahara, which will be a future episode of the podcast. They adapted it into a Matthew McConaughey movie. Yeah, so I can't deign to have any firsthand knowledge of DeLillo's novels and if they really are as wonderful. But I can tell you for a fact that people who love the smell of their own farts sure do love that guy.
I guess that's who this movie's for. I feel like there's a way to take that and interpret it into a movie that's entertaining for a wider audience, but I don't think Cronenberg was interested in doing that.
No, he very much made a movie for himself and no one else. All right, so we already talked a little bit about Pattinson in this role. Was there anything specific to this section about his performance you wanted to discuss?
He's just the chief purveyor of that stiff, stilted, cold, off-putting dialogue, and you gauge everybody else in the movie against him of whether they're following that lead, which we assume is based on Cronenberg's direction to read this stuff this way, versus some of the actors who do what is typically thought of as the actor's job is like, let me imagine what state a real person might be in that would cause them to talk like the lines that I have for my character, right? And that can be a hard job when the dialogue is complex and heady, and as it is in this. And some of the actors approach it and try to make their characters more human. And actually, I think Jay Baruchel is the first guy who jumps into the limo and has a conversation.
Oh, jeez. It's Jay Baruchel. Right.
And I actually thought, I was impressed. I don't think of him as that special as an actor. I think he's funny and I've seen him in some things that I like. But like, he tried. He was a little more human than everyone else, which was unfortunate because he set a tone that mostly wasn't matched. The characters got stiffer and weirder as it went on.
Yeah, there could be some value in having Pattinson be like the outlier with that kind of stiffness and emotionless delivery to show that he's very much a cipher, a blank slate, just fueled by rampant consumerism and material wealth. But for that, you need dynamic performances to bounce off of him. And mostly the movie's just not interested in providing those.
Yeah, I thought his wife, Elise, played by Sarah Gadon, was the second most stiff character.
Yes.
Which makes sense.
Comes from old money, though. Like her character is even wealthier than Pattinson's.
Yeah, it's not a bad choice. It makes sense. She's this trust fund kid. She's very stiff blue blood kind of a person. And it makes sense. They go together. Their marriage is a marriage of convenience. It certainly seems pretty loveless. They don't really know each other.
Although they have three fucking, like, I don't think I've had 3 meals in a day with my wife ever. Certainly not on a work day.
They find time, despite his busy job of taking a limo across town, which takes him all day and night. He gets out of it 3 times to go to diners and a sushi restaurant and have sit-down meals with his wife.
And again, I get Sarah Gadon. I've seen her in other films be interesting and vibrant. So
yeah.
you got to believe it's a choice. But if I have to hear Robert Pattinson beg his wife for sex one more time, I'm gonna fucking lose it. That's the sum total of their conversations.
That's the thing, that like, he's not begging, he's arguing her for sex. He's like making a intellectual,
almost worse. Yeah.
I know it is worse. It's terrible.
Imagine if you're like, I'm not in the mood, and he's like, well, let me explain to you why you should be. What a fucking terrible person.
It's rough. And the other people, Juliette Binoche is also in this, who's a very appealing actor. She starts the string of people that he has sex with, which is just, it's intentionally uncomfortable.
They're all either employees for him or subservient to him in some way. Like they rely on him for their income, which casts a shadow certainly over all the sexual interactions.
She's his art consultant, and while having sex with him, they're also having this discussion that's theoretically meaningful about his desire to dominate art as his way of appreciating it. He wants to buy this.
The Rothko Chapel.
Yeah, she's got this one Rothko painting that's available, and he's like, that's bullshit. I don't want to buy one painting. I want to buy this entire chapel, which I think is in Texas.
It is. Like, it's actually it's a historic site, so I don't think he could buy it if he wants to.
Yeah, it's supposed to be ridiculous. He's trying to wield his power to take art away from other people, buy an entire chapel and relocate it inside his Manhattan apartment, because that's just how monumental his place is.
Yeah, he said he'll keep it intact. How do you move something like that? Which is, get it up to the penthouse floor of a skyscraper.
Which is funny, and I think that's DeLillo being funny. It's obviously ridiculous to a farcical extent, but it's very mildly amusing the way this stuff is done, and because it's played very straight and droll, I don't know, it's hard to get any joy out of that.
Yeah, and if I had to draw a conclusion about what the film is ultimately trying to say, based on this interaction and some other ones, which we'll get into a little bit later on, it's that money perverts art and ruins it. People who wield money don't understand art and are incapable of understanding art, which certainly feels like Cronenberg would be on board with that based on his experiences trying to get movie studios to finance movies about, having sex with cars. But is this the best vehicle for that? No pun intended, vehicle. But is this the best vehicle for that kind of thesis.
I think that's a fair point and a cool observation. Because the Eric Packer character, he's obviously making that point in a heavy-handed way. He's doing the grossest caricature of that rich person and their poor relationship to art. So there's no tension in it. You don't go, oh, but Eric Packer is so charming and I get why he's powerful and I get why he's charismatic. You don't feel any conflict over like, but he also abuses art. You're just like, this guy's a shit from the start and he's a blowhard and meaningless. And like you've written him off the first time you saw him. So there's no tension left when you show, oh, but he also has a bad side. You're like, it's all bad side.
We're familiar with his bad side from the get-go.
This guy's stupid.
He's an idiot too. He's a bit obtuse. I mean, you get the sense that he got here through his understanding of numbers and his kind of manipulation of numbers and understanding of global finance, which is also how he loses his fortune throughout the course of the movie, which is like an interesting thing the movie does in the background. It might explain kind of his self-destructive path he goes on, but it very much is operating in the background. If you take that whole storyline out of it, I don't know what it really changes, that he's actually losing his fortune as the movie progresses.
There's some joy in watching the movie in drawing out that thread because it leaks it here and there. And it's like this guy suggests, oh, maybe this is going a weird way and these other events in the news. And then he says it eventually that, you know, this is costing me hundreds of millions. But yeah, it's back to like, we don't really care because we weren't invested in him succeeding. We don't know what it means that his love of numbers, you know, in the end, the villain explains to him the fault in his philosophy where he thought he could win because he was looking for one thing and that's not the way nature works. But kind of like, okay, but I was never invested in his view of the world in the first place. So it doesn't, you don't feel anything when that's torn down.
What about his prostate? Are you interested in that?
The movie's interested in his prostate.
A perfectly symmetrical prostate, I believe, right? There's nothing wrong.
You would think.
Or unusual with it.
With a man who is a paragon of perfection, you would think that his prostate would be so symmetrical, but his doctor informs him that it's lopsided. What do they call it? Do they say
asymmetrical?
Lopsided?
They just say asymmetrical.
Asymmetrical prostate, which I didn't know was a thing. It actually may not be a thing.
It probably isn't.
It's meant to be funny. He's getting a prostate exam in the car. He's bent over. The doctor's on his back end and
another one of his employees is there.
Is in his face.
Emily Hampshire. Yeah.
That was an unfortunate scene, both because it's doing something farcical. He gets a doctor visit every day. He gets his prostate checked every day because he's so concerned about health. And so his face is up in her face as he's getting checked from the backside. The gross part is that she's getting turned on and he calls her out that she's like squeezing her water bottle between her thighs in a more and more excited fashion.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be some statement about something, but it was just uncomfortable and weird.
Emily Hampshire, a very winning actor as well.
Sure.
I really enjoyed her on Schitt's Creek, but like in Schitt's Creek, she's also playing a pretty dry, sarcastic character. So I do think like this role is uniquely catered to her acting style. Not to say she's incapable of emoting more, because there are certainly scenes in Schitt's Creek where that does happen, but was a pleasant surprise seeing her in this movie, and then they didn't do much with it.
It got less and less pleasant the more the scene went on.
All right. Was there anything else from this section you wanted to talk about?
No, let's just keep the limo rolling.
Let's roll along very slowly because there's traffic. The rat-themed protesters create a disturbance on the streets, and Eric's limo is vandalized, but he and another of his employees are safe inside. Then he stops at a hotel and has sex with his new bodyguard, Kendra. Now it's nighttime, and Eric once more finds his wife Elise on the street and takes her to dinner. He tries to have a conversation and connect with her, but she rebuffs him and tells him that their marriage is over. Then Eric learns that his favorite rapper, Brother Fez, died, and the funeral procession for the musician becomes one more addition to the slow Manhattan traffic. Later, as Eric gets out of his car for a moment and he's hit in the face with a cream pie by Andre Petrescu, aka the pastry assassin, who celebrates humiliating the billionaire as the paparazzi snap their photos. Afterward, Torvald explains that this was not the threat he warned about, and a real assassin is still out there. Eric asks to see Torvald's gun, and he uses it to shoot Torvald dead.
Man, as I listen to you go through the set of plot points in this act, I'm like, they're all like random. Like there's one continuing plot point, which is like he meets the wife again, and she's like, we talked about you having sex.
He literally like every time he sees her, he has just had sex.
Exactly. She calls him out again. She's like, sex again, like this. I'm done with this. And like, okay, that's a story that's evolving.
He must have the refractory period of, like, because he just had sex and he's still like begging her for sex.
He is a horny billionaire. You got to give him that.
Which also is probably trying to comment on something about how like people with access and money seek out pleasure but don't actually feel it or enjoy it the way normal
That's
people
true.
would.
Yeah, his sex is pretty hollow. That seems to be illustrated on screen. And then he's just like encountering other people. Brother Fez, the pastry assassin. Those are like, oh, what are some things you would encounter on the streets that would like mess up your day if you were a rich billionaire? And they don't seem to be connected to anything. They're each kind of maybe making their own little bit of a point, but it's hard to take much out of any of that stuff.
Yeah, and the pastry assassin based on Noel Godin. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, but he is a Belgium terrorist of billionaires. I don't know what you call him.
Yeah, what do you call? I was struggling with that too. We know this is a thing. People who throw stuff on celebrities in public.
His Wikipedia calls him a notorious pie thrower. Or intartor is the French.
There's a French term for it. Excellent.
But yeah, he's been making these sponge cakes with whipped cream and throwing them at billionaires and other people he deems worthy of having a pie thrown at them for years. And he did it to Bill Gates in 1998, which was probably his most high profile pieing. And he became like pretty famous for a little while because of that. But he's still around. He's 78 years old.
Wow. Okay.
He's very particular in how he's described. He believes this is a nonviolent form of protest and social commentary. And he's very careful to make only pies that would not actually hurt somebody when they're throwing at them. If you throw like a Carvel ice cream cake at somebody, you might kill them.
That's true.
So he's very careful to make sure that physical damage.
The whale cake is a lethal weapon. So I guess, activists, pie-based activists is a way to describe these people. The character himself is fun. I like the actor, Mathieu Amalric. He's a character that's at least infused with human energy. Like he just comes on screen, he cream pies the guy's face. Sorry for that terminology. And then the rest of the scene is like Torvald chasing him around.
It was my understanding that you can't cream pie a face.
I don't think this is the podcast to dissect that.
All right.
But the rest of the scene is him just dancing around and gloating and trying to avoid being tackled. And he talks about all his accomplishments, including I quiche the Sultan of Brunei in his bath. He has a lot of funny lines, but it's like a one and done. It's, again, a commentary on wealth and power and activism that the movie's maybe making, but...
Sure, but then Packer has almost no reaction to it one way or another. You know,
he's like a little mad.
For like a second, and then he never even bothers to clean himself off all the way.
He doesn't even clean himself, which I guess is part of the illustration that he's on this self-destructive spiral downwards through the film because his business is dying and he's having an existential crisis. But yeah. And what do you make of Brother Fez? That happens before this.
Yeah. Brother Fez is the other point I wanted to make about how wealth corrupts art, because I think the fact that he's not just a musician, but a rapper is significant because hip hop has always been a music of the people and of the proletariat. There's access to it that maybe there aren't in other types of music, where you don't need to be able to afford a cello or a piano or learn theory or go to music school to be good at rapping. You just need your mind and inspiration. It's just a very democratic style of music. And for Packer to kind of embrace it in this way. And you brought up the point that like, he's like, oh, one of my elevators plays his music all the time. Whereas elevator music is such a derogatory term usually for kind of soft rock or whatever it would be. It's to me illustrating again that he doesn't get it. He's missing the point of all this, but he gets the special access to who is this character supposed to be? Brother Fez's manager?
I don't know. Yeah. We learn about Brother Fez's death through this guy that just gets in the limo and starts telling him about it.
And their conversation, I think, lends credence to my theory a little bit too, because when Packer assumes he died in some violent fashion, he's like, no, he's had heart problems since he was young.
Yeah.
And he actually shows emotion and gets angry with Packer. I'm sorry to disappoint you. So that's a scene where they're trying to, I think, pin home that he is an interloper in this world, this music world, and just trying to buy his way into it.
Yeah, there's that one attempt that you said, the manner of Brother Fez's death pokes a hole in Packer's assumptions about rappers, which does one thing, but then they also let Brother Fez be ridiculous because Packer goes on to talk about he had some relationship with him. He stayed at his house. And not only did he stay at his house, he stayed in his minaret. Brother Fez had a minaret built at his mansion and he moved into it and he lived up there. And so Brother Fez is like this caricature of, I don't know what. He's heavily like Sufi Muslim coded to the point where there's those spinning dancers at his funeral. Mm-hmm. He's living in a minaret that's not nuanced, not supposed to tell you in truth about the diversity of human experience, but be a cartoon version of it. It's just hard to make sense.
Yeah, and like letting Packer into your place of worship, something that's supposed to be a sacred place, is driving home the point that maybe they're both
phonies.
Fake.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're big phonies.
There's a lot going on.
But to what end?
I don't know. And on the most basic level, it's
chalk it up to who gives a shit.
Yeah. On the basic level, it's just like a practical plot point. We had to make this trip take a really long time. What's another thing that could slow down Manhattan traffic? Oh, there's a funeral procession for a famous celebrity. So it helps slow the limo down so we can spend all day in it. it.
I will say I strongly dislike the music of Kenan.
Yeah.
Both the flag song that was used the Olympics.
Was it Olympics or a World Cup? It's some kind of soccer
a World
event.
Cup, I think. And then his other big hit was Bang Bang. And look, if you're a listener who likes hip hop but finds Chance the Rapper a little too threatening, you might enjoy these songs.
I wanted to like his music, the song that's in the movie that he wrote and performed for the movie. Like, this guy appears in the movie only as a corpse.
Right.
Not dragged through the street, but ceremoniously driven up the street in his funeral procession. But he does appear on the soundtrack, and they play his movie song, and it's not really good. It's kind of annoying, like the rest of the movie.
I actually wanted to bring up a conversation we had off mic, if you're comfortable with that, about the endorsement Jay-Z gave Kenan and how that kind of relates to the themes of the movie.
Yeah, there's actually a tie in there.
Because Jay-Z said that he made with this Wavin' Flag song. Well, let me get the actual title. Oh, it is called Wavin' Flag. So I was right. But he said that he made an anthem for a whole generation. But once somebody becomes a certain level of wealthy, like everything they say is subject to considerations about how it impacts commerce. So I can't really take anything Jay-Z says seriously at this point in his career.
Yeah.
There's an agenda for everything.
If you hear the song and then you hear Jay-Z endorse it, you're like, that's bullshit. He's saying that for a non-musical reason, because Jay-Z is as legit as it comes when it comes to his ability to speak on quality hip-hop music.
For sure. I mean, I say this as a lifelong Jay-Z fan, and I do mean lifelong. I think I bought Reasonable Doubt when I was 10 years old.
And it's no accident. He publicly embraces the idea that he's not a businessman.
He's a businessman. Let him handle his business. Damn.
So when he says something like that, he's doing business. He's not expressing his opinion. And that's pretty clear.
Yeah. And I think that kind of ties into what we were trying to theorize about Packer, maybe.
Yeah. He's trying to be a businessman. If only the movie gave him Jay-Z's charisma, that would be a different story.
I always forget that Robert Pattinson's British. Do you forget that too?
His accents are good. That's something you could definitely chalk up in his favor, that you don't think about that.
He's played far more Americans, I think, than he has Brits. Let's talk about him killing Torvald, because...
Oh, that's true. I almost forgot that happened.
The scene itself is pretty comedic, maybe one of the more comedic scenes in the movie, because Torvald's got this gun that is so theft-proof, essentially.
Yeah,
you know, like it's
down.
built, it won't work unless it hears his voice, even if he says something that's not the secret phrase.
Right.
So Pass has got the gun in his hand and basically forces him to say the phrase and then shoots him right in the neck, essentially.
You think he's just curious, but he's like, oh, show me. And it's got the thumbprint. And then, oh, and what's the phrase that you have to say? And he's showing it off. And then out of nowhere, he takes it and shoots him in the head.
So the question of why is a big one in this scene for me. And I have a couple ideas that I wanted to run by you. And I am by no means standing firm on any of these. They're just kind of...
Yeah. Let's try him out.
One, he wants to go confront this would-be assassin and does not think he'll be able to do that because this isn't just a random bodyguard. This is his head of security and seems the most personally invested in his well-being. So he doesn't think he'll be able to do that if he's still around. That's probably the most likely, in my opinion.
That makes total sense. Torvald is pictured as very capable, not farcical in his skills as a head of security. So yeah, you would think that he would deal with the threat. And we do see this character has a death wish. He's trying to accelerate this confrontation with what might do him in.
So the other two things I came back to are he's mad he got pied and Torvald wasn't there to stop it.
That's a good funny reason.
And the other is Torvald does make a snide kind of comment when he asks to see the gun, like, you paid for it. But actually revisiting that, I don't think that's anything that Packer would be offended by, more empowered by, likely.
Yeah. I mean, it comes out of nowhere. There's no other hint of antagonism. I mean, there's a little bit. Torvald's being...
He's frustrated with Packer because he's taking these stupid chances throughout the movie.
He's being a little bit of the surly bodyguard, like, you really shouldn't do this, but not in a way that, like, puts them at life or death odds. And then I guess the way that Packer shoots him is maybe another symbol of how he treats the world as disposable to him. Like, if he wants to be rid of his head of security, he just gets rid of him.
Does it in full view of two kids playing basketball as well who don't. And there's no indication for the rest of the movie that the cops are even looking for him or interested in what happened. So
not in this world. That's like not a thing.
It's not a real place where real things happen. Okay, that's all I have. If you're ready to move on, and so am I.
All right, let's bring this thing to its garage where we can park it overnight.
Where the limos live. That was another thing I found funny. It's almost like a childlike question. Where do the limos go at night?
We're going to find out. It's late at night, and Eric's driver, Ibrahim, informs him they've finally reached the barbershop. The barber, Anthony, has to come out from the back and unlock the door to let him in because it's after hours. As he cuts Eric's hair, Anthony shares remembrances of his days driving a cab with Ibrahim, who also had been a cabbie. When they realize Eric's chief of security is missing, the barber gives Eric his pistol, and Eric leaves in a hurry with only one side of his hair cut. Ibrahim drops the limo off at a garage for the night and leaves Eric alone on the street. Then Eric's shot at from a nearby window, and Eric enters the building to find his assassin. The man calls himself Benno Levin, but he's really a former employee named Richard Sheets, played by Paul Giamatti.
Dick Sheets.
Eric and Benno have a standoff and a long philosophical debate. In the end, Eric uses his gun to shoot his own hand. Then, with Benno's gun pointed at his head, Eric sits and waits for the man to pull the trigger.
I wanted to call attention to the fact that Ian writes all the synopses for these movies. This must have been one of the more challenging movies to summarize you've ever had to do. There are some where you're just like, I don't know what the fuck to make. Like, The Empty Man was hard because it plays with time and chronology a lot. There are other movies that have been challenges, but was it tough to just come up with enough stuff to feel like you fleshed it out?
I thought you were doing that like a Spinal Tap Jazz Odyssey. Ian Dukes, he wrote this. But yeah, I try to capture the plot points, but give a little flavor of how they come across. And when they're like, don't make all that much sense and fall together in a jumble, that's probably intentional. That's my interpretation of what I took from the movie.
So let's get into it. Did you know that Eric's barber used to drive a cab? He loved his cab. He loved it so much.
I think I heard that.
He might have mentioned it once or twice. I swear to God, this guy talks about his fucking cab for 20 minutes, right? Like, the third act of this movie is just various 20-minute long conversations.
Yeah, it's just two big conversations.
I shut the movie off. The first time I was watching it, I stopped right after he shoots Torval. And I was like, all right, it seems like the movie's like amping up. So let me take a break now, and then I'll finish it tomorrow night. And then I was like, fuck, it just got so boring again.
These scenes are tough. The barber is given some of the toughest dialogue in terms of it being stilted and strange and not very human-like.
Ibrahim too.
And the barber actor, he has some old New York guy qualities, but really one of the more unfortunate attempts, I thought, at reading the dialogue and making it work. It's just, he seems like a total crazy person, but I don't know if that's what they intended.
He keeps some takeout in his fridge for snacks. Like, how old is this takeout that he's giving Eric?
Gives both the guys some takeout, which is an interesting, specific little detail. But I don't know, is there something to be taken from the way he like welcomes them, he feeds them, and then he just blabs about his cab. And Ibrahim also drove a cab, so they commiserate. And he's like, I love my cab, and I used to drive my cab, and I would eat in the cab.
They talk about where they would pee.
My half-baked theory was maybe like this is supposed to be Eric's attempt to connect with the common man. There are definitely themes about how his wealth elevates him from contact with real people. But these are like not the realest of real people. They say a lot of things that identify them as working men, but in the most weird, stilted way that you're like, these are still freaks. This is not him like coming home and being fed. It's not like the Goodfellas going into the mom's house and sharing a dinner late at night and being humanized by the family connection. You just get weirder when you go into this guy's shop because he's so weird.
Yeah. And so he gets half his haircut and runs into the night with a gun. It doesn't exactly run, he gets driven. Which, why is Ibrahim driving that limo to storage? It's fucking destroyed. Bring it to a body shop or something.
It's pretty messed up. Did we talk about it? Got vandalized by the rat people earlier on.
We didn't talk about it, but it was part of the synopsis. It's getting worse and worse over the course of the movie.
There's kind of more plot towards the end. So in some ways you're relieved. You're like, oh, they're going places. They're doing things. He's shooting a guy. He's getting a haircut. He's got a gun. It's like a little more action to contrast the talkiness of a lot of the first half of the movie. But then like the action doesn't make sense. I couldn't actually figure out, even after watching it twice, what motivated him to leave his haircut halfway done. He just suddenly gets a bug up his ass.
I think it's supposed to be a commentary on the asymmetry of his prostate also.
Oh yeah, I didn't pick up on that. That's good. But then, so he's like, I gotta go. And he rushes and he gets back into the limo with Ibrahim and they actually don't have a destination, right? Like he ends up taking the limo back to the garage, which answers a question that Eric posed earlier, but he's not going there because Eric said, take me somewhere. He's just like, I just got to get back in the limo and ride with my guy.
It seems strange that Ibrahim would just leave Eric in the middle of this industrial neighborhood.
Yeah.
Which is probably like somewhere in Queens or who knows, or Jersey.
Yeah, they don't show him taking any particular direction. He's just like, okay, this is the end of my shift. I'm parking the cab in the garage. And it's like, yeah, the movie doesn't follow conventional plot logic, but why didn't Eric say, take me here? Or Ibrahim ask him, where do you want to go? And him say, I don't care, just finish your shift. There's none of that. It just
hit me that, did Eric maybe have a funny hair up his ass about like where the limos live is where my assassin is? But like, how do you explain that? How does he have that information?
As far as I can tell, that's totally random that he happens to get out of the limo. He answers his question, where do limos sleep?
Which sounds like a fucking children's book for billionaires.
And the answer is they sleep right across the street from the dilapidated apartment where your assassin lives, who conveniently just leans out the window, shouts your name and shoots some shots at you.
That was like my most fist bumpingest moment in the movie is when I heard that lovely voice scream like only Paul can. Packer! I said, oh shit, is that Paul?
Neither one of us knew that Paul Giamatti was in this movie. I didn't clock him on the screen. I clocked him the next time he comes on screen, which I felt was still, he has a towel over his head in the next scene and he's in the background.
And he's clean shaven. And I never like a clean shaven Giamatti, personally.
Oh.
It's upsetting for me.
But it goes well with this character. This is an upsetting character.
Right. He looks more pathetic without a beard.
Yeah.
So I think that it does fit. His character's supposed to be a sad, pathetic dude.
Less handsome, more pathetic. I thought Giamatti almost saved the movie, and it's ironic for me to say that because to save this dialogue-heavy, convoluted movie by getting into a 20-minute philosophical dialogue for the final action end scene.
Dog, I couldn't tell you a single fucking thing they talked about. I know we got some background on who Sheets is and why he's mad at Packer.
Yes, there's that.
But the rest of it is just bullshit, nonsense.
And the scene.
Total misuse of my boy Cleveland Heap.
Yeah, I don't know if this is intentionally comedy, but they face off. They both have guns, and it's clear immediately that they're more interested in having a conversation than shooting at each other. So Packer sits down on the couch and says, I've had a long day. Time for a philosophical pause, some reflection. And I'm like, you son of a bitch, you did nothing but pause and reflect the whole day. And now you want to take us through another 20 minutes of it.
And then yet another callback to the asymmetry is that Sheets also has an asymmetrical prostate, we learn.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He said that's why Packer lost all his money. He wasn't paying attention to the asymmetry in the finance world.
That's true. That gives us some either like a real message of the movie, or it's perhaps a joke that the message is that simple. You were looking for perfection and you didn't consider that nature is weird. It's almost like too on the nose and simple.
Part of me thinks the asymmetry is also a commentary on like disparity in wealth, because you could say that's another example of asymmetry is like,
that's true.
Like they're asymmetrical to each other because they're in such vastly different social standings.
You're doing a lot of good connecting of ideas to actually smart things that I just didn't even have the patience to attempt.
Again, we're giving the movie maybe more credit than it does. Like, not to say I'm smarter than Don DeLillo or David Cronenberg. I would never claim that. Those guys, I'm sure there's a lot that they were trying to do that is going way over our heads. My point being, like, that's your fault. That's not mine.
Yes. But here's something interesting. When we talk about Cronenberg's vision, I was like, wow, Giamatti bucked Cronenberg? It definitely put this bug in my head that Giamatti's trying to be an actor, and more than anybody else in this movie, as he says his crazy lines where his character's clearly in his head, jumping from one thing to another, saying things that don't quite make sense. When Giamatti says them, it's believable because the man is so good at his little ticks, his little noises, his little laughs, his little looks, that you believe that this person's brain is actually bubbling. And these things that are weird to say sound right and somewhat human for this character. And I'm like, that's cool, that's enjoyable, but he's breaking the mold.
Yeah, I think he's just such a dynamic performer. You can't entirely tamp it down no matter how hard you try.
Yeah.
I still found him less interesting than I typically do in a Giamatti performance. But his character is, like, Packer does things that seem crazy in hindsight, not least of all murdering his bodyguard in cold blood with a bunch of eyewitnesses right there, shooting himself in his own hand. But he never seems crazy. He does crazy things, but he's just a blank slate. Whereas, like, Giamatti, I think, is trying to portray a degree of mental illness in his performance. And that's why maybe he feels like more of a character than Packer, who is just as capable of doing insane things, but is very much a shell, a cipher.
No, that's true. But I got some enjoyment. There's actually some tension, and it's artificial. It's pumped up by the fact that Giamatti's character is holding a gun to the back of Pattinson's character's head. I'm like, okay, there's some blood flowing. There's some life. There's some human heartbeat in this scene. And I was thankful for it. But yeah, it comes at the end of the movie. It still goes in circles of philosophical dialogue for 20 minutes. And it ends without satisfying you either way because it cuts before we know whether he pulls that trigger.
Yeah, it gives you the old Sopranos. Did he die? Did he live? Who knows? Doesn't matter. But yeah, to produce some tension for the first time in a nearly 2-hour movie and then deprive us of the payoff feels very Cronenberg-y, but also very annoying. And I'm annoyed. This movie annoyed me. I lost my thesaurus.
I think in the end, I'm like a little bit friendly to this movie, but only because I accepted from the beginning. I'm like, this movie is so far outside of the realm of a movie that's trying to entertain me that I need to take it for something else. It's like your cousin got you to go see this small community theater production of some weird shit they wrote. And it's like, oh, this is not for fun. This is an exercise. And like, okay, I'm in the exercise. I'm going to sit through it and see what I can get out of it.
That's fair, but it is still a movie. And, I look for certain things in movies, and this movie failed to provide me with any of them. The timing of one line towards the beginning of this movie is very poignant, though, and he's saying that there's a threat against the president. And what does Packer say? They still shoot at presidents? Like, this movie was on the schedule for months, everyone, just so you know. Also, we didn't even bring it up in the synopsis, but I just thought that was very interesting timing.
Yeah, I screen grabbed that when I saw that and sent it to you. They still shoot at presidents. It was like incredibly timely. The day I flipped that on and saw that line for the first time, I was like, whoa.
That was like the day after, I think, right? Or
I think
a couple days after.
Yeah, it was eerie.
Wild stuff. All right, so that's the movie. Let's talk a little bit about Cronenberg. So this is our first Cronenberg movie we've covered, but not the first time we've had a Cronenberg appearance on the pod. Do you remember when we saw Cronenberg? What movie? He acted in a movie we covered.
It sounds vaguely familiar, but yeah, my mushroom pills aren't kicking in today. You got to help me out.
He's like an evil scientist at the beginning of Jason X he's like the first kill of the movie. He gets killed by Jason.
That's right. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, that was the first Blastover or second Blastover with Nash was on that one.
Yep.
So yeah, we've had Cronenberg on before. And every time I look into Cronenberg, I'm always shocked at how few movies of his have actually done well financially.
Oh, okay.
And I think he owns up to this. And I think he said it is getting harder to make a movie because like it's true for a lot of these guys like Lynch or even like PTA. A lot of PTA's movies are financial failures, but I think studios were kind of willing to roll with it because they know it's going to be a movie that sparks conversation and will likely end up being a good movie that maybe gets some awards consideration and brings some prestige to the studio, even if they don't make money on it. But nowadays, I just think the margins are so tight. There's no real home video revenue to speak of. So
yeah,
it's becoming harder and harder to justify these type of movies. As much as I shit on this movie, I do really enjoy David Cronenberg's work and hope he gets to do it. And I also enjoy his son's work, Brandon.
Oh, okay.
If you haven't seen his movies, they're quite fucked up, very body horror-esque, like his old pa.
I think you told me that, and that scared me off enough to not dip into that.
Is it Possessor and Infinity Pool, I think, are the two.
Okay.
Let me see.
I heard a little bit about Infinity Pool.
Possessor is way more gnarly to me than Infinity Pool was in terms of like actual gore that will stick with you, like you'll be thinking about for days and days. But Infinity Pool is like more upsetting overall, I would say. They're both tough watches, tough hangs. He really seems to be just embracing because Cronenberg has always done horror, but he's always branched out a little bit too. And I think Brandon's made 3 movies so far, and they're all firmly in the horror category.
Cronenberg, I think I have like childhood trauma from not even from seeing Scanners, but from just knowing that existed as a young boy when that came out. Like that caused some psychic damage to me.
For me, it's The Fly.
Yeah.
Like, I accidentally caught it on TV as like a 7 or 8 year old, and it fucked me up for a good long while.
Oh yeah, that fucked me up too.
I still, if I see the Brundle fly to this day, I'm like,
yeah.
His final form, even though the middle forms are a little more gross to me when he's like becoming a fly.
The teeth falling out or whatever body parts he's losing is really gross.
Yeah, he's very gooey. But then at the end, he's just and shout out to my buddy Tim for putting me onto this phrase. He's just a wet puppet. But Cronenberg does love his wet puppets.
He does.
But he's capable of doing some like elevated stuff too. He's not just a gross out director for sure, even though like you'd have to fucking quarter me to get me to watch Crimes of the Future. I have no interest in watching that. That's another Vigo collab. But yeah, so I wanted to list the movies Cronenberg's made that didn't bomb because that's a shorter list.
Oh, okay. Let's focus on the good stuff.
Shivers, which I couldn't tell you anything about. It's before my time, before your time even. The Fly, of course, was a hit. The Brood, which I've never seen. Scanners, A Dangerous Method, which $30 million gross on a $14 million budget. It maybe broke even if they're lucky. It didn't have a big marketing spend, I'm sure. That's a tough sell. But that's about as best as we could do on this list. The Dead Zone and A History of Violence are the only movies he's had that you could argue made some money if you look at it through the right lens.
Yeah.
And then the rest, Dead Ringers, Naked Lunch, M. Butterfly, Crash. Crash's budget was private, but it made $12 million, and there's no way it cost much less than half that. Existence, Spider, Eastern Promises, Cosmopolis, Maps to the Stars, and Crimes of the Future. Crimes of the Future was a big bomb, actually. Like that might have fucked up his odds of getting another movie because I think that movie had a $50 million budget. The effects were just significant. All right, I doubled it in my head. $27 million budget for Crimes of the Future, but it only made 4.
Ooh.
That's a big loss.
That's straight into the ground. That sucks.
So while it does qualify for this podcast, as long as I'm the host, we will never fucking cover that. I don't want to see that.
Okay. Thank you for protecting me from that, shielding me.
I'm protecting both of us. Let's be real. Like I have more of a stomach for horror than you do, I think.
Yeah.
But body horror is not my thing. I really dislike it.
That's rough.
Okay, so he does have another movie coming out, though, luckily.
Okay.
The Shrouds with Diane Kruger, Vincent Cassel, and Guy Pearce.
Oh.
Like the cast, Guy Pearce went from being like 35 for 20 years to immediately being 60. Okay, so he did have to go to France to make it. It's a French-Canadian production. Let's see what the premise is. Karsh, who is the Vincent Cassel character, is a prominent businessman, inconsolable since the death of his wife. He invents grave tech, a revolutionary and controversial technology that enables the living to monitor their dear departed's corpses as they decay in their shrouds.
Ooh.
One night, multiple graves, including that of Karsh's wife, are desecrated, and he sets out to track down the perpetrators. Weird.
That's a cool, creepy premise. I like it, I have to say.
It is a cool premise, yeah. It did debut already at Cannes in May of 2024, just a couple months ago.
Okay.
It was nominated for the Palme d'Or, and it has mostly good reviews. But yeah, there's not a ton of information out there out of it. Interesting that he always works with Howard Shore as his composer.
Yeah.
Howard Shore, to me, he's the Lord of the Rings guy.
Yeah. I don't know that much about him, but I feel like that might have been an outlier for him, doing this super traditional, like heavy, recognizable motif, melodic music that he did for Lord of the Rings, when it seems like maybe he's in his element in this movie, doing like weird hybrid techno pop.
Beep boops.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings was a departure for Peter Jackson, to be sure. So
True.
maybe he looked to bring along some of his more like genre buddies.
Yeah.
Could be. So the only actor I wanted to focus on is Pattinson because it's his movie, for better or worse. And this was, like I mentioned in the monologue, it came out in between part 1 and 2 of Twilight Breaking Dawn. If you've never seen any of the Twilight movies, it gets real fucking weird towards the end.
Really?
Yeah, a werewolf guy imprints on a baby because he wants to date it when it gets older because he loves Kristen Stewart, but she loves Robert Pattinson. It gets real fucky. I can't. Not to mention the baby is born half vampire, I think, or all vampire. I don't know if he could be half a vampire. I guess Blade is.
That's true.
But like they use like a CGI baby that is just absolutely insane. And I almost want to recommend it just based on the pure gonzo nut shit in there. But like it's a bad movie.
Okay.
It's poorly written, poorly acted, poorly directed. Though they're all pretty bad, the Twilight movies, but they're incredibly silly without knowing it, I think. So
yeah, I managed to avoid them. Like I was aware of the Twilight phenomenon when it had its big moment. And even like the Hunger Games too, I was like way too old to get sucked into that YA book-based trend that got really
like
big.
The Maze Runner, like there was a Divergent series. There was a ton of them at the time, but
Yeah.
I did like the Hunger Games movies because I'm a sucker for a battle royale type premise.
I feel like Hunger Games was at the top of that heap in terms of having some real appeal for people outside of the genre.
Yeah, I can't remember who directed the first one, but it was a good director, Gary Ross. We did cover a Gary Ross movie, didn't we?
He does sound familiar.
Free State of Jones. That's our boy.
Yes, that's a pairing right there.
Yeah. So yeah, this was a lot to say that the Twilight movies are fucking bonkers. And in a way that I don't think they get enough credit's not the right word, but like attention for that. Like they're insane.
Okay, yeah.
They're literally very strange movies. And
I did
don't
not
think
know
gets
that. So
brought up enough.
No.
Everything in it from like the acting choices to the story choices are just very strange. I kind of want to rewatch them now, just in like a way to make fun of them.
Yeah, you're making me almost want to turn them on.
Yeah, it's definitely got so bad it's good potential. But then, so after this, like we said, it opened up some doors for him to work with more auteur filmmakers. Like he would go right into Werner Herzog and Queen of the Desert after this.
Okay.
And then he would do James Gray and The Lost City of Z, which is a fucking banger. Great movie. We're Gray heads over here, though. We love James Gray and The Blast Zone.
What do I know James Gray from?
He's a Queens guy. He did Ad Astra, The Yards, We Own the Night.
Okay.
He's one of my favorite working directors.
I didn't connect him. I did like Ad Astra. I look forward to that coming up on the schedule.
It's coming up soon. Yeah, shout out to James Gray, my buddy from Queens. What up, homie? Went to high school with Trump, I think. Or no, his dad went to high school with Trump. Because he wrote about, like, when he wrote Apocalypse Time, Trump is a character in it. Because they went to the Armageddon Time, not Apocalypse Time. Sorry. Trump is a character in it. Like, it's a period piece about growing up in Queens.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, he doesn't get a lot of screen time, so don't go see it if it's just for that. But it's a good movie overall.
Cool.
Good Jeremy Strong performance. Yeah, Lost City of Z felt like a breakout for him. He got a lot of praise for that, a lot of attention. He's not the star of the movie. Charlie Hunnam is, but he steals the movie from Charlie Hunnam, who I've never thought is that great of an actor.
Okay.
We'll find out more when we cover King Arthur in a couple of months. Then he did Good Time in 2017, which I can't say enough good stuff about. And then he would go on to get egged with The Lighthouse in 2019. He got eggers.
That's when I fully became a Pat stan. Lighthouse is in my top tier of movies, and he was great in it. So cool.
Really bummed I couldn't connect with The Northman more because the other Eggers stuff I've seen, I absolutely loved. And I'm excited for Nosferatu.
The Northman is quite a bit more bloodless and shut down emotionally. I guess unless you have to get really hyped into the Nordic legends and then it can be meaningful. But other than that, it's a little cold compared to The Lighthouse. It's two guys just screaming in each other's faces and sweating on each other.
And farting.
It's so physical and visceral.
Way more fart jokes in The Lighthouse than I anticipated when I walked into I didn't see it in theaters, into the living room to watch it. But then he would, of course, do Tenet in 2020. Like a movie I feel like is mostly forgotten nowadays. You know, it was a hot topic of whether or not you could understand the dialogue in it when it came out. And it also insisted on a theatrical release, even though it was like the high time of COVID when it came out. So it was financially a loser for that reason. But I hesitate to put it on the podcast because it clearly lost money because of COVID and not because of audience's disinterest or whatever.
Yeah, but I think it still gives us license to talk about it if we felt like we wanted to jump into that one day.
Yeah, we'll see when the next Nolan movie comes out. Maybe we'll try to tie it into it.
Yeah, that'd be worth it.
He doesn't have many that qualify for the pod, so we got to take him where we can. And then he, of course, was Batman.
Yeah.
So can't say he left all the franchise stuff behind. Did you see The Boy and the Heron yet?
No, I'm looking forward to catching that at some point.
He's got a vocal role in that as the Gray Heron.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's the titular heron, but
we don't know. We're gonna have to watch it and find out.
And then he's got Mickey 17 in post-production coming out next year, a sci-fi movie directed by Bong Joon-ho.
That sounds cool.
So that'll be a banger for sure. I don't think Bong Joon-ho's made a bad movie yet.
No, looking forward to that. I think my little underrated Pattinson performance that hooked me in was The King, where he played, what was the French character's name? He just was so nutty in that. He had so much fun with that role. I was just like, this rocks.
Hold on. Let me find his name in that.
The
Dauphin?
Yeah, the Dauphin. Is that how you say it?
Dauphin? Yeah, that sounds right. I always got this movie, Cosmopolis, confused with High Life, which is another R. Pat and Juliette Binoche movie, but a way more visceral movie. It's a sci-fi horror movie directed by Claire Denis. So that's a cool one, and it involves black holes. Claire Denis, a very good director. I would recommend that one.
That sounds fun. Like, I get why if you just see the poster of this and hear the title, you're like, oh, this could be sci-fi.
Right. Even seeing Cronenberg on the masthead, like it does set your expectations for a certain type of movie. And that's not what you get.
Nope.
Do you want to hear what we're covering next week?
I sure do.
Next episode, rather. We're going to have some fun. This was a dour slog of a movie. So I thought, let's go popcorny for the next one. And,
okay.
We're going to the island with Michael Bay.
Oh, that's Michael Bay. Okay. I knew, like, I'd
ScarJo, Ewan McGregor. It's got Michael Bay always gets good casts.
Big stars, yeah.
And I saw The Island, not in theaters, but maybe right after it came to DVD and not since. So I'm excited to revisit it. I remember not hating it. Sean Bean, Jimon Hansu, Michael Clark Duncan, Steve Buscemi. Every Michael Bay movie has an absolutely stacked cast.
Is this in honor of Michael Bay taking up Skibidi Toilet and anticipating the excitement around that movie?
I would love to say it is, but realistically, I put it on the schedule months ago.
Okay.
I try to be timely when I can, but...
Is that a real thing that I just referred to, or did I get caught in a Twitter joke?
Yeah, are we getting caught up in the misinformation campaign? But I've heard the same rumor you have, so let's see. Let me do some research.
We'll dive into that. That'll be a subtopic for next episode.
Yeah, I don't think Bay is a great director by any means, but he certainly made movies I enjoyed over the years, not least of which was Ambulance, which I had a great deal of fun with. Like, if you take them as sci-fi or fantasy, they're all a lot more fun, even when like they're set in the real world with ostensibly real people.
It's really, in some ways, it's like the opposite of this movie's aesthetic of fuck the story and the dialogue, and it's like, what are fun things we can do on a movie screen? So that should be a nice change of pace.
Don't we feel like a bunch of anti-intellectual dipshits right now? Like, Michael Bay's actually pretty good compared to Cronenberg.
We embrace both sides, and we may not be perfectly symmetrical. We might be a little bit lopsided, but that's the way nature is.
It's never backfired on anyone else. So, all right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod if you can. We've been stuck at the same number of reviews on Apple and Spotify for a while. We'd love to bump those numbers up, maybe get recommended to some new listeners.
That'd be neat.
You can still follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod, but we're also got the Instagram up and running again. We'll be posting on there. If you're not a Twitter person, you can follow us there. Also, BlastZonePod. You can also email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com. Any feedback, movie suggestions, questions, whatever, and we'll get back to you post haste because we like getting the fan mail.
We do.
That's it from me. I'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.